God bless you, and as always, I thank you for your time. Today we're looking at the second book of our Bible, which is Exodus, chapter 3 to be exact. It's there we find the book's author, Moses, in the field tending sheep, when out of nowhere he sees a bush which is on fire burning, but miraculously it's not burning up. It's from this fire, as a matter of fact, that God speaks to Moses. And this is a big deal, not only because of what God did, but because of what God directed Moses to do. See, understand, at this time the Israelites had for 400 odd years been held as slave laborers, working night and day, but having nothing but tired feet, sore backs, and broken spirits to take home at the end of the day. Maybe you understand. See, they had for 400 odd years been oppressed and depressed, stressed out and self-medicating, trying to survive within a system that was designed to suppress by implanting a mentality that dictates that certain people have no opportunity to succeed. I just wonder if you understand. In Genesis, God told Abraham, for 400 years your descendants will be enslaved and mistreated. But now we have this burning bush, and from this fire, God tells Moses, enough is enough. Moses is told to go back to Egypt and to deliver God's people from the situation, the cycle, and the circumstances that held them hostage. And I just wonder when we are going to stand in agreement with what God has already said and say enough is enough. God told Moses, I promised my people freedom, and now I want them to grab a hold of it. God called Moses to confront Pharaoh's society of oppression and deliver his people into the land of opportunity. But Moses had questions. And you know, I like that Moses had questions, but more than that, I like that God addressed Moses' questions. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes I have questions. Things that God calls upon me to do. Responsibilities that God requires that I take. And instead of saying yes, I say how. Instead of saying yes, I say why me? But I'm glad that Moses had questions. It's because of Moses' questions that we see that God is patient with us and accepts that our disbelief in ourselves is not a disbelief in our God. God knows we're human. And he tells Moses, I'll be with you. Still, Moses said to God, suppose I do go to the Israelites and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And then they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? And it's interesting that Moses was concerned about what to tell the Israelites when they asked, what is the name of the God that sent you? And maybe Moses expected this response because the people had been worshiping idol gods, and with that, they wouldn't know which God was answering their prayers. And we see that today. God moves in our lives, but we have put so much effort into pursuing our own remedies that we find ourselves giving praise to everything from the pastor to the palm reader after we get our breakthrough. Just in anything that sticks kind of religiosity, worshiping, believing, praying, and being grateful, but to what God? See, the people heard of the God of their fathers, but it had been years since they lived a life of unadulterated worship as did their fathers. In other words, although they knew of the divine God, they did not know the divine God. And it's the darndest thing when worship becomes so contaminated that we become Christians that know of God, but in all actuality, our worship does not lead us to knowing the God. And yes, truth be told, some of it is because we have moved too far from the unadulterated worship dedicated to the God of our fathers. We know of God, but we don't have a personal relationship with God. Trying to survive in our own personal Egypts, not knowing God enough to grasp that He has long since set the captives free. Moses knew when offered the fulfillment of the promises of God, the people were so far removed from their relationship with the divine God that they would not even recognize His voice. Yet we have God commanding Moses to go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt. Moses says, even if I do go, what shall I tell them? Moses is saying, how do I make these people know who you are? You're not the God of the sun. That's who they know. You're not the God of fertility. That's who they worship. You're not the God of name it and claim it. That's who they praise. They're going to ask me who and what you are. And it's in verse 14 that God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you're to say to the Israelites. Tell them, I am has sent you. See, in that culture, a name represented not only what a person was called, but also what to expect of that person's character. So when God said, just tell them I am, He was defining not only His name, but His very nature. And it's funny that when you or I say I am, it must be followed by something to make the thought complete. But only God can say I am, and it makes everything that exists, will exist, or ever has existed complete. See, when God says He is I am, that means He exists independent of anything and all things in existence. God is the creator, but has no creator. He is today, but He is also yesterday and tomorrow. The old church would just say He's God and God all by Himself. And it's this self-sufficient, self-existent, perpetually present and unchangeable nature that guarantees that what He wills to do is only contingent on Him deciding to make it so. And you know, there are a lot of books, articles, and opinions about what God meant or what He was intending to convey in these few 2 or 3 letter words. But I just don't find it that complex. What I do find is sometimes we can complicate God's word and make a mess, and sometimes we can complicate God's word just to be messy. But I like how God made it simple, because I don't need a PhD to understand that I can pray to God about a medical report, because He's already said I am a healer. And I don't need a pew set aside for me, because when I pray to God about protection for my kids, I know He's already said I am a fence. And I don't need a title, because I know when I pray to God about wrongs that I just can't make right, and anxieties that just won't let my head not ache, and dimes that take too long to make dollars. Ultimately, I know all is well, because God has already said I am is who I am. And that is more than we need or can ever imagine. God bless you.